Okay, I think we'll kick off. So, welcome to the first webinar in our series for our new course, A Master of Leadership for Development. So, this course is delivered jointly with the University of Melbourne, and it's taught fully online, which means you can study anywhere in the world so long as you've got internet connection. So the course itself focuses on the practical skills, global connections, and collaborative outlook needed to make a real difference in the development world. Now, I'm joined today by a few of our academic colleagues, but our two course directors who are really excited to provide you with an insight into the course today. And I'm going to hand this over to them both once I've told you a little bit about how today's session is going to work. Now, today's session is recorded, so you will receive the recording after we wrap up at around 12:30 UK time. We would really like to make this session very interactive. And as prospective students with varying backgrounds and areas of expertise, we would really value your thoughts and input throughout. So what that means is please do submit your questions, comments and thoughts in the chat function throughout the session, but also at the end of the session, I will stop sharing the PowerPoint, and I'd welcome you to kind of share your videos and say hello so we can have a really engaging conversation with you all. So before I hand you over to Jaco and Violeta, our two course directors, I'd like to introduce myself. So my name is Daisy. I'm one of the course advisors for this course. I'm based in Manchester, which was a very rainy Manchester, but it's actually, the sun is shining now. So I've got over 4 years of experience within the student recruitment space. I studied human geography at university a couple of years ago, so I find this course particularly interesting. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Jaco and Violeta. My main role here at the university is to offer support and guidance at every stage of your decision-making journey so that you feel that you've made the right informed decision about kind of your next academic career move. So my contact details are going to be provided at the end of this session. So please do get in touch with me if you want to speak in more detail about the application process and how you can take the next steps in repositioning yourself as a leader within the development world. Now, it's nice to see a few names that I've already had conversations with already. So hi and welcome, and obviously welcome to those of you who have not yet spoken to. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to our two fantastic course advisors who are going to take the lead on this session.
Thank you, Daisy, and warm welcome from myself as well. My name is Jaco Renken from the University of Manchester, but we'll get to some introductions of academic members in a little while. The most important people around the call today are, of course, you guys who are looking in to do a master's in the near future. And it is really important for you, probably you've done this already, but to have a little think about what it is that you really want from the master's degree that you are going to embark on. And, you know, it's a substantial investment of time and effort and energy. And you really want to think through what the potential outcomes are. What do you want to have at the end of this master that you'll take forward into your career? It's most likely the final capstone degree for many of you. And therefore, that's important to us as well. So there's a question that we pose for you over here to say, what questions would you like to have answered by taking this Master of Leadership for Development? Are there particular issues that you feel by the end of this, I would want to be competent in that? I would want an answer to that kind of question. So as we're going to proceed now with introducing staff and stimulating you a little bit about the issues around leadership for development, would you have a little think about that and pop it into the chat if you have a moment to just type it in there. And it would be lovely for us to have a look at that, to get to know you a little bit. Of course, we're also going to have plenty of time, as Daisy introduced, for questions and answers and discussion towards the end. So it's also convenient for you to have those ready to type in the chat if you want to do that, or otherwise we can do that in person in a moment. Next, I'd like to introduce our core academic team. So I am Jaco Renken, and the Manchester course director for this particular course, and also the academic lead on the site. With us today from Manchester is my colleague Natalie Cunningham, who has decades of experience in leadership development and coaching within the developing country context and transitional country context, and all of that speciality knowledge and experience are brought to bear on this program when you come and study this with us. We also have Dr. Rory Stanton, who is the lead academic on the development side of things, who you will get to meet during the very first subject that you will sign up for. Then, not with us today, but a key member of our academic team is Dr. Shirley Jenner, who is a long-standing academic with loads of experience in both business and the civil society sector in terms of coaching and leadership and managerial skills development. And Shirley is convening the fifth subject in the sequence of subjects that you're going to do, known as International Management and Leadership. We also have my colleague, Dr. Kelechi Ikuma, who will be convening the third subject in the series, which you'll get to know a little bit more later on. Kelechi is a specialist in leadership, particularly within development, and you're going to have the wonderful privilege of having his experience brought to bear on the program as well. As for myself, my my core competence in research come from the digital development side, and we will have a little bit of a flavor of that in the subjects that you'll be doing over the duration of the course, particularly where it overlaps with leadership, digital technologies and leadership. Over to Violeta on the Melbourne side to introduce us.
Hey everyone, lovely to meet you. I look forward to having a chat. My name is Violeta Schubert. I'm actually Macedonian. I'm an anthropologist by training in development studies for quite a long time. My current projects are on women and leadership, as well as e-governance and leadership. Mostly I look at the intersection between culture and identity and leadership. My colleague Leslie Pruitt, she's also part of the team, and Leslie has done a lot of work with youth and leadership. She's also written books on the UN systems, women in the UN system. She's worked extensively with NGOs as well. I've tended to, for many years, be involved in protection of children and various kinds of humanitarian response, humanitarian action as well. So as you can tell, this is a wonderfully experienced team, but also extremely passionate about the notions of leadership and how they interface with development.
Thanks. And just to say, while we think of this as the core academic team, there is a whole lot of associates, people that we are able to mobilize from the two universities, networks, to bring in some practitioner insights and experience, which is what you will be able to benefit from when we study on this program. So the team here is the core one, but it's a much larger team of involvement from very renowned academics, but also leaders of international organizations and very senior experienced leaders within the development sector to help us get a real practical perspective on leadership and not just a theoretical one. Vicky.
So if you might have noticed by Jaco calling me Vicky, you are most welcome to call me Vicky. Everybody calls me Vicky rather than the Slavic Violeta, nice and long. I'd like to actually sort of open up to give a sense of what we're facing. I mean, obviously with the COVID situation, the COVID pandemic, we are facing something phenomenally impactful to our societies and to life. But for quite a long time, actually, in development, there's been what's been called a crisis of leadership. And it's not simply a leadership in general, but the particular way that development needs to conceptualize and think about what kind of leadership is needed in what kind of context. And right now, you might be well aware, in the United Nations is facing a phenomenal challenge. You know, the very efficacy of what it's about has been questioned, to the point where the Secretary General Guterres saying, we're in trouble, we need to change course. And a lot of that changing course, working in context of us facing crisis, also comes down to somehow a leadership deficit, the feeling that we're not actually taking a lead. And we are going to explore in the course, well, what does it actually mean to lead, in what way? You know, the kinds of expectations and aspirations for leadership one might assume are appropriate for development. Well, development's changing, as Jaco will discuss. I'm being fascinated by the very notion that we have not only a leadership crisis in development, but a global leadership crisis. And, you know, taking into the context of our global society, for example, that quote at the bottom by Theo Felsman, who's a professor of industrial psychology and people management, saying, you know, it's time to stop the rot. It's imperative not to start with answers to give questions, but rather upfront to identify the right questions about the future. And I think that future fit leadership is actually something that's phenomenally important for us in development to consider.
Thanks, Vicky. That is really insightful to problematize this area, that there's a need for leadership and there's insufficiency. But in various scenarios, encounters with people, as we've been developing this program over a number of years, people have approached me and say, so what is exactly unique about leadership in the development sector, if anything? Isn't it just like leadership anywhere else? Does it warrant a master's program in and of itself? And of course, I have worked with these colleagues over years and established that we do think there are a number of things that are distinctive about leaders and leadership within the development sector. But it could happily be just my own little private thinking that's going on there. So 2 years ago, we had the privilege of hosting Helen Clark, the 37th Prime Minister of New Zealand, at the Global Development Institute. She was also the administrator, the head of UNDP from 2009 to 2017. And I had the opportunity to ask her this question, particularly because she's been in a position of political leadership and a position of leadership within the development sector. And a very interesting response came, but in sum, she pointed out how leading a country, New Zealand, is something one can collectively refer to as executive leadership. There's a delegated authority and there's an executive element of leadership where you instruct things after consultation and it just happens. Things happen through the institutional arrangements of the political and parliamentary system. But when she moved over to UNDP, the whole nature of leadership had to change from that executive, almost top-down mode to one of horizontal engagement, advocacy, ideas leadership, team leadership, and persuasion. Her job was now not to tell prime ministers and presidents of other countries what they should do to develop and to improve the situation in their countries, but to sell ideas to them and to help and support them, the transformational aspect of leadership. And that's just a small illustration of the distinctiveness of leadership in the development sector that you and I encounter as we go on. And quickly, I've just for the sake of conversation points today, identified 5 areas that one might identify as distinctive and why this program has good grounds, this course. And the first relate to problems. So the problems we are addressing in development are typically sticky problems or wicked problems, inequality, racism, poverty, corruption, and you guys are more familiar with those problems than us. But those problems require very complex solutions, and often with unpredictable outcomes, and often with failure when we're trying to address these, because they have competing interests. Easy example would be climate change, the need to preserve the environment versus the economic growth that's so needed to alleviate poverty. Then there's issues like situating around power. Power is so central in leadership, and power and power relationships are translated into control mechanisms that is either conducive or not for development. So it's really important to be wide-eyed and open-minded about power, and to be able to engage, confront, and work with power. And that's rather distinctive. Stakeholder arrangements in development is rather complex, and a large part of distinctiveness comes from having to intervene or mediate between donors and NGOs and private sector and public sector organizations, and everybody's got slightly different agendas and interests and outcomes. And this whole idea of balancing contradicting interest is a key element of skills that's needed over here. Values, we know that in our sector, leadership and values are inseparable, particularly because it's often as a result of this advocacy, ideas leadership, transformational approach to leadership, you've got very little in common other than the values that you share in order to build trust and move from there in order to accomplish development. So values are often the only common ground, and therefore something really important for us to reflect on and be secure in our values and lead from a position of values. And finally, what might be known as globalization. Essentially, Vicky mentioned the shifts and the changes in development, and one of those trends is from a rather narrow international development type of paradigm to a global development paradigm, so clearly shown to us through COVID-19, where a local response is not sufficient. We need coordination across the globe. And in terms of leadership implications, we need those skills and the knowledge to be able to engage with those different levels, both locally and globally. And these are but a few ideas around the distinctiveness of leadership, which you will deeply encounter in this course, particularly if you sign up for it. But that's just to stimulate a little bit of what the program brings to us. But over to Vicky to give us a little bit of an overview of how this would work.
So what we designed, guys, is a part-time program. You'd be taking it over a 2-year period. We've designed it so that you're doing one subject, one unit at a time. Okay, you're going to find this is the interesting cultural difference thing. You would think Australian university and English university speak the same language, but we found through the process that the words subject, course unit don't quite always mean the same things. But it's a part-time over 2-year period. And what we're doing is we have 3 subjects offered by Manchester University, 3 subjects offered by University of Melbourne. You're approximately about 15 hours per week, but the important thing is it's at your pace. And we've given an enormous amount of thinking and about the design to enable you to have self-paced, but also the interaction with your peers and the interaction with us, and getting that balance of having webinars from time to time as well. The first unit, contemporary development, that Jaco will give you a little brief on, following is starting in March, the start of March. Yeah, the fees are there as well. So, and oh, there goes Jaco.
Thank you, Vicky. So I'm sure you guys have looked at the website already, and I've looked through the aims of the program, but just briefly, we really want to look at the big picture of institutional structures and power relationships and enable us to really critically analyze that in this program. So this will enable us to understand the foundations of development and the foundations of how things work and how the cogs are turning. And you will have the opportunity through this program, as you engage with that, to also network with other development professionals who work in this area. So a key value for us to build is the coherency and the networks. And at the end of the program, you will really get to know quite a few people much better, and a lot of people a little bit better, which is really something I think is valuable for this program that is brought together from two institutions. And then there's the mode in which we study, because I anticipated some of us would say, how can we really study leadership without physically being together in a classroom? And I'm going to reassure you that we use real-life scenarios, global case studies, and all sorts of innovative activities, including some simulation, to help us get this really done well. And we have seen over the past couple of months how this is possible for us to do a lot of things we didn't think is possible online. And importantly, both universities have slightly different approaches, and combined, you're going to acquire fantastic critical reason and analytical expertise to help interpret development situations, devise solutions, and move forward from there into your practice that you hope to be doing much better after completing the program. What we want to do next is quickly introduce to you, just briefly, the 6 different subjects. And you can go and have a slightly deeper look and then ask questions about this. The first one, and these will occur in sequence, is contemporary development. Well, in this subject, you can think of as laying the foundations of what is going on in terms of development, international development and global development. It gives a critical overview of the field, and it helps us to understand the different actors and stakeholders and how they interact and collaborate at times in order to bring about development outcomes. And it particularly focuses on contemporary challenges. So we look at what's going on today, and we look at how are things going to develop into the future. So contemporary development are going to be facilitated by colleague Rory Stanton, and it will be the first one where you will really get your teeth into the development theory and practice. Vicky.
We all know, and I've been listening, reading your chat points, the very nice, interesting points that we'll take up. But contemporary leadership comes about in all sorts of ways. We need to actually think about the theories, the approaches. We need to have a critical eye. There's no element of leadership, as you well know, and I'm sure with your various experiences, that level of being able to take into consideration different ways of seeing leadership, the different debates, is really important. It's important because it contextualizes the range of challenges, the range of approaches that are coming at us. NGO leadership, the kinds of issues on gender equity, diversity. A lot of the people in the sector that I speak to say, the biggest thing for me right now is about diversity in leadership. But, there are different opinions and different perspectives. We are situating, and in this, you're going to be a little bit more social science theorist engagement as well, because I think it is really important to think about how leadership has been theorized. Give ourselves time to be reflexive as well. And reflexivity is one of the critical issues that we think it's both a skill and an approach to understanding leadership. I assume if you're interested in this one-year course that you would have some experience, some background, and it's how to move that forward, which is why we wanted to focus on contemporary development context as well, and by the same vein, contemporary leadership. Thank you.
Thanks. So in the third unit, we're bringing these theoretical and foundational elements of development and leadership together in the unit titled Leading Development, where we're going to focus particularly on the development sector and how leadership plays out, the unique applications, the complexities, the distinct challenges of leadership. Particularly, we look at, for just to stimulate your interest, on post-heroic leadership perspectives. We're looking at non-Western and other approaches to leadership. We definitely challenge in our course the whole idea of heroic leadership. We're going for more of a collective leadership approach and how that plays out in different development scenarios, so that you will be really well prepared for a range of scenarios in development to exercise leadership contextually relevant and effective based on both theory and the foundations learned earlier and the specifics encountered in Unit 3. And then Unit 4 zooms out, Vicky.
It zooms out actually to a fundamental issue, and I noticed that some of your comments relate to that. You know, is it about leadership and management, or is it about development? Well, we well know that the development context is predominantly from an organizational perspective. You know, most of the development occurs through an organization rather than us individually working in community, although I've worked with community leaders and they're absolutely brilliant. The organizational perspectives, the relationship between organizational change, but also the way that leadership is becoming reoriented. For instance, the whole issue of localization, the issue of how do we accommodate culture. You know, what constitutes a change theory within the context of what development organizations are facing. Some of these issues, by the way, you know, are the stock kinds of concerns with any organization, and organizational adaptability, flexibility, reorientations that are required. I mean, for example, COVID-19, the enormous amount of pressure and the downsizing of so much of development organizations. How do they reflect and move forward? So the relationship between organizations change and where leadership takes a place in that is the fourth unit.
Right, and from the organizational unit, we even go wider, because we've earlier already indicated how you need to look wider at global value change and global connections and how things work together and how leadership would play out in that setting. And for that, we have an international management and leadership unit, the fifth one in the sequence. And here you will be introduced to different perspectives on international management and theory and practice, and how it applies to development. There's a focus in this particular subject on innovation in business arrangements and models, for example, NGO, public-private partnerships, different configurations that sits there, innovative organizational arrangements, strategy formulation, to be able to have your local organizational strategy mindful and engaged at an international level, and many more interesting elements at that level where development cuts across a single organization and a country and or a region. So that is the fifth subject. And then the sixth one is most interesting.
The leadership and skills in action subject, unit, module, C, cross-cultural language, jumping from the last unit discussion, is really more focused on articulating and engaging in scenarios. So we have a lot of simulations in various kind of scenario contexts where what we've drawn together in our study together up till Unit 6, we put into the actuation. So a lot of attention on leadership in terms of in us doing it in action together, reflecting on that doing, after all, which is what most of development is about. It is about the doing and how we do it, but to critically think about the doing as well. But it is very much practice focused.
Thanks. And then for some of you guys, you will ask, so I want to really focus in on a particular issue, either a development one or a leadership one, and that's where the capstone component comes in. And there's two different formats for that. One will be a small group project in which you will work that out, or if you seek to do an individual piece of research for which you will be prepared throughout the different subjects. There's a research focus in each one of those subjects to equip you to be able to then conduct an individual dissertation where you can go deep into a particular area of interest. It's about a third of the program. And that, in short, is the structure. 6 subjects with a capstone combined to give a holistic approach to leadership within the development sector.
Next
slide, please. We just want to take a brief moment here to just acknowledge that it's really important to think about careers. How will this course benefit your career? And perhaps just one element to outline for you at this point in time is, I don't know if you guys have seen the latest DevEx Talent Outlook for 2020. And interestingly, is that the top 5 hardest to find soft skills has leadership head and shoulders above any of the others, even though it's the top 5 that's been listed over there. So if you can demonstrate that you have been trained and skilled up and competent in terms of your leadership, the development sector would pay attention to what's going on your CV. So we do think that's what the course is primarily aimed at, is to empower you in terms of your leadership competencies and skills, but bespoke to the development sector, acknowledging that you also need the knowledge to operate within the development sector. So the course include that. It will expand our professional network. It will give you a broader perspective, which is the key incentive we pursue through the 2 institutions partnering together to bring this to you. Vicky, do you have another observation about?
Yeah, I think one of the parts, as Jaco said, you know, this reference to soft skills, which is really ridiculous. I think there's nothing soft. I think there's enormous amount of really hard slog. For instance, I think more so than any kind of role that we take on, leadership requires that we are reflexive. We think about, you know, very complex context and issues. Being able to take ourselves out of a particular sort of track paradigm and stand back. And I think that the cultural aspect, diversity, gender aspect really is absolutely lacking in the standard ways of seeing leadership. Leadership in other contexts tends not to sort of hone down as much attention to what the leadership is for, rather than just the leading, but that intent of leading. With leadership, not as a thing in itself, an identity to take on, but a portal through which you can do something.
Fantastic. And I think that's so true, and you can hear that we are passionate and involved in this course and in the content and in leadership particularly. We invested ourselves, we've got experience of leadership, and we've just learned that we don't know enough yet, and we want to pursue this more with you guys alongside us, and we can become all better empowered through this. We're happy to have conversations about this in more detail, particularly if you want to share with us your career path, whether you want to move into the development sector, whether you want to move across one element, one part of it to another part. If you want to particularly go for upward mobility, we can outline for you nicely in a conversation on how that would work and invite you to ask those kind of questions. But now we really want to turn to some of the questions that's already been posed in our chat, and then invite you, if you just want to use the hands up facility to indicate that you want to ask a question in person. And while we wait for you guys, I'll just turn to one of the questions that I've seen that's a really important one. Amongst all of them are important, but Amadeo, you asked us about, is this a leadership level course,
Yeah.
or is this a managerial course, or is it a development course? And to some extent, the course is a hybrid of development and of leadership and of management. And the reason why is that we're so clear that you need that development, understanding and knowledge, and also the skills to be able to engage in development, to do assessment of situations, to understand the dynamics and the politics and so on, but then also to have real leadership skills to be able to interact with other people, to gather resources, to communicate really well. And so the program is applied throughout, very mindful of the development theory and practice, but also of leadership and managerial skills and competencies to understand change, to understand power and politics, to be able to be effective as a leader in teamwork, in strategy formulation, in execution, in monitoring, and so forth.
If I could add, Jaco, I think, Amadeo, the best way to put it is that it has to be a leadership. It is a course on leadership. We're not trying to focus, leadership for a particular kind of development outcome or a particular way of seeing development. There's actually very few opportunities for people concerned and interested in development to focus on issues of leadership. We take a lot for granted without actually, compared to other disciplines that, say in business or sociology, even in other places where they've put so much attention to what leadership is about. It's not just innate and anyone can do it. Of course, people can do it, but we've been accused in development, as I'm sure you'd be aware, generally, that there's a lot of mistakes being made. I think it's the moment for us to be critical thinkers and reflexive about what we do in development in terms of leadership. So it is absolutely development context, but honing in focus on leadership.
I just observed in the chat that there's some more questions, and thanks to other colleagues that have already addressed that. Perhaps drawing a more general point out of the questions is, one of you guys asked about access to education as a key area, particularly in the Indian context, but let's think about it more globally, or gender inequality and women's safety. So those are big issues, and you may ask, so what issues are we actually addressing over here? What are the issues that we're addressing? What are the issues that we encounter, in the program? We certainly can't address all of those issues, but you'll find that we have got a whole range of case studies and interesting focus areas which are particularly contemporary and relevant at this point in time. So the ones that you've mentioned are certainly big challenges around access to education and gender and inequality. You've heard how Vicky is oozing with
That's all my work. My work is focused on gender, and so, well, not only gender, a lot of stuff, but yes, most of my work in the last 5 years has been looking at the issue of culture, gender, diversity in leadership, working with LGBTQI perspectives, looking at age aspects. Most of our colleagues, you will find that we do consider these things as very fundamental cross-cutting themes. In some places, such as in the contemporary leadership, I do take on the issue of equity, equality, and access. Education-wise, there's enormous amount of really interesting material on leadership for education. It's actually quite inspiring extension. And by the way, that's one of the things, if you join the class, if you become part of this community, and it is a community of learning, there's a lot of bringing in the understandings and approaches from other fields from other disciplines. We're not sticking now, it's not a sort of how-to training. It's a master's level course. You're gaining mastery of the relationship between leadership and development in broad perspective.
Yeah. Very good. And then, in terms of the general application of that, if there's a particular specific area, then we've got access to a range of competencies and skills, not only in the core academic team, but each one of us are embedded in large academic departments with 50 world-leading academics in the Global Development Institute, from where we can tap, expert input and guidance on a specialist issue. You may be particularly interested in trade or in global production networks, or an element which we just introduced, and you can then pick that up as a capstone component for you and go into depth and under the supervision and guidance of our team, really get into cracking some of those wicked problems and difficult areas.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I do think that's all of the questions that we've had come through. Avinav and Amadeo, it's nice to see you both again. So thanks so much for joining today. And to the rest of our audience, thanks so much. And obviously, Vicky, I know it's kind of nearly 9:45 where you are in the evening.
No problem.
So thanks so much. And Jaco, thank you as well. And to the rest of the academic team, thanks for joining. Vicky, do you want to go ahead?
Apologies, the delay. Can I say, this is a first opportunity for us to get to know people who are interested. I don't speak for all my colleagues, but certainly we are very open and interested. If you'd like to get in touch and you want to ask something more or have a discussion and say, I'm not quite sure, get in touch. Yeah. I mean, it's you shouldn't just sort of hear and then go away. Interact. Ask questions, email me as you like.
Absolutely. And on that, in terms of the admissions process, and if you're looking to really seriously apply to the programme, please do get in touch with me. I can direct you to kind of the right people and also kind of offer you that support as well. So on that note, let's wrap up today's session. Again, a big thank you to you all for joining, and I'll send this recording out to you all on today's call so you can have a listen back at your own time and own pace. And I look forward to keeping this conversation going with you all.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the guys on the call with me today will echo that as well. So thanks so much again, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, evening, or whatever time it may be, wherever you are. And I'll speak to you all soon.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye everyone.
Guys.